Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Wallace. How are you? I just wanted to do this quick video. I think in class we spent a little bit of time doing some compare and contrast of the Inca and the Mexica. So in terms of like pre-contact, I think you have some good resources to address that. Sorry, I'm not sure where my video is doing that. But the one topic that maybe we didn't get a chance to discuss a lot in class was some of what's in the Bentley text. This is some of the content about the Spanish colonization and, what happens in New Spain. So that's what I'm going to highlight here. This is for the purpose of the Americas quiz. And just so you know, everything that you need for the quiz is under the post. The post has a Bentley reading and a few other readings that we dealt with in class. So the only one that is like a new reading is the Bentley text, and typically you have a benchmark on this type of reading. In this case, there's not a benchmark, so use this video as a guide to give you an idea of what topics you really want to focus on. So Francisco Pizarro is the person who conquers the Incas. He's Spanish. And, one thing that we noted with the Mexica, smallpox definitely had an impact when Cortez did his conquest, but really smallpox followed the Spanish to the Mexica, so it has an effect, but mostly after the Spanish have already instilled their military conquest. In the case of the Inca, smallpox as a disease decimates the Inca largely before Pizarro gets there, and so there's a great deal of political issues when the Spanish arrive. So in both cases, both the Mexica and the Inca succumb to the Spanish on one hand because of a great deal of political issues. We noted that in the case of the Incas, Atahualpa was kind of in a civil war with his brother, and he was trying to legitimize his power. He's in the process of trying to build his own power base, and then that's when the Spanish arrive and demand gold, and ultimately Atahualpa is going to be executed by the Spanish. And because it's such a centralized political system, the political mayhem that was already happening becomes, 10 times worse with the loss of Atahualpa. A couple of other things that we can add to this, understanding of the Spanish conquest of the Inca includes an argument by Jared Diamond. So I think we went over this just briefly in class. So if you see the name Jared Diamond, he's really a biologist, somebody who's interested in the role of geography and how it played a role. And, he tries to refute the idea that the Spanish, conquered the Mexica because the Spanish were, stronger militarily. He doesn't focus so much on the political issues going on with the Mexica or the alliances that the Spanish had with, say, in the case of the Mexica, the Tlaxcala. There's a whole bunch of different arguments for why the Mexica and the Incas fall to Spain. When it comes to Jared Diamond, he really relies on geography, that over the course of time, geography in the area of Central Europe and Western Europe is able to organize earlier. So there's greater diversity of domesticated animals. There's greater productivity as a result of that. Higher protein grains, so you have a stronger food supply as a result of greater food surplus earlier on than, say, in the Americas. You had a lot more time for specialization and technology. That might have been, say, for example, making guns or making steel weapons. Written language was something that the Spanish had the advantage of. Atahualpa did not. He might have heard about some things related to the Spanish, but largely he is in the dark when it came to understanding where the Spanish were from and understanding their religion and whatnot. We could certainly make an argument that the Spanish didn't understand the Inca either, despite having written language. But in any case, Diamond's argument is really that geography lent itself with a whole bunch of advantages for the Spanish, and he wrote a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel that really talks about how it is that Spain came to have steel weapons and the Inca did not, and also the role of smallpox and how one society could actually succumb to smallpox while the other societies seem to have like an immunity to it. How come the Spanish weren't equally as affected by smallpox? You know, he tried to address that particular argument. But once we look at the Spanish, right, I think we noted this in class, and we started to, and maybe it's the social system that we didn't get to as much. In terms of economic, you know, we're going to see a lot of encomiendas, this idea of agricultural communities that are going to be growing food, and largely the Spanish will initiate some of this under a system of forced labor using indigenous persons as the labor force. We also see silver and gold mining. Potosi, which is in modern-day Bolivia, is one example where the Spanish largely use indigenous labor to extract a great deal of silver that they will then kind of distribute back to Spain, but also for the purchase of goods that can be brought back to Spain or resold. A whole bunch of new currency is going to make its way into the global markets as a result of the Spanish conquest of the Inca. And, you know, a really big takeaway is that for Potosi, for example, the Midas system, which was employed by the Inca, gets exploited by the Spanish, and largely the Midas system is used to force societies to send workers to Potosi, which is seen as a place with a really high mortality rate. It was, you know, treacherous work and really involved a great deal of, labor consistently. So it ended up being a space where indigenous populations see a lot of human rights abuses. When we look at the size of the political systems, you're going to see these viceroyalties, New Spain, New Granada, New Castile. Over the course of time, we see the development of a great deal of Spanish cities, and Spanish colonies do tend to become fairly urbanized over time. Spain had been organized with large-scale cities. Spanish colonists that arrive tend to settle in some of those settings as well, and they are kind of creating the political leadership. They also are given encomiendas to take on, which are really spaces that are worked by indigenous persons. The political system is really one where Spain and the Spanish government are in charge. There is a viceroy that is selected from a Spanish noble family, and they kind of take orders from Spain. So it kind of works through Spain, you know, charging the viceroys with a variety of tasks. The viceroys enforce the laws, but Spain creates the laws. They grant encomiendas, they collect and augment royal revenue, so there's taxes on indigenous populations. They might nominate colonial officials. So some of this is kind of the task of the local political leadership, which is Spanish as well. And then you also have a kind of arm of the Spanish government that's also going to belong to the Roman Catholic Church. So there will be a independent kind of missionary work going on under, for example, the Jesuits or other Roman Catholic missionaries. A great deal of forced labor, and there's a great deal written about some of the treatment of indigenous persons under the Spanish. We saw the same thing with the Taino, and this becomes a consistent issue. There are revolts at various points in time, and indigenous people will plead for better rights. In some cases, there will be a call on for better human rights, and in some cases, some Spanish leaders will try to grant that. But again, Spain is far away, and the local rulers really are running the political system. In terms of the economic system, you know, the key takeaway is really that role of silver. This is an example on the right. You can see the picture of Potosi. We also get a lot of commercial agriculture. This is where you can see some of the colonialization that's happened in North America. The Viceroyalty of New Spain is actually pretty extensive. It kind of follows north of Mexico all the way into California, also into Florida. So Spain has significant land in the Americas in the 1500s. You can also see, the English very, very much north in the areas kind of in the very, very northern part of North America, and in also, of course, the 13 colonies, and France in the middle of the country. And we'll know from things later on in world history too, you'll see some of that. And of course, the Dutch in Indonesia, and you can see some of the other areas too. One thing that we didn't get to in class, and this is where I wanted to just focus, is one of the dynamics that happens in New Spain, all the different areas of New Spain, is we see some very interesting social effects. Spain will rule from afar politically, but you also develop kind of a social hierarchy. And in a lot of cases, we're going to see in both of the Americas, North and South, race and ethnicity will become very, very significant to the social hierarchy. This becomes, really an America's thing. In North America, which you probably know some of this from just studying American history, but in early American history, we have a great deal of segregation between groups of people, indigenous peoples, white Europeans, say from England or from, the Netherlands, and also Africans who are enslaved and forced to come to the Americas. In the case of North America, these groups largely, it's diverse. There's a lot of different groups of people, and people may, live in a shared space. So Jamestown, for example, after it's set up by the British, do over the course of time see indigenous people in the region. We'll see Africans and African Americans, but in time, there does become very, very specific segregation of spaces and virtually no intermarriage. Of course, it does occur, but it also, Europeans in North America will largely see Africans and indigenous persons as non-Christians, and largely will see a maintenance of white European culture, African enslaved person or free person culture, and indigenous people will often be moved relatively early on, pushed out, or involved in conflicts with white Europeans. So we have something very different that goes on in the Spanish colonies in the middle, like Central America and Mexico, modern-day Mexico, and especially South America. And the really big takeaway here is we end up with very few Spanish settlers relative to North America. Most of the Spanish settlers are exclusively men in South America and Central America, which means that they do not come with their families. This is different than, say, the Puritans or the Pilgrims, who come, for religious freedom with large families, and they maintain those families and separate from other groups of people that they label as different. In the case of New Spain, we see a lot more intermarriage, and what is used as the word to describe this as mestizos, and mestizas and mestizos. These are essentially groups of people who are of mixed European heritage, maybe indigenous heritage, maybe African heritage. And in South America, this becomes tracked in a lot more specific ways than it is in North America, where the tendency is to label people eventually by race as either, say, for example, white or black. People fall into one of those categories, and it's kind of very, very specific. In the case of South America, there's many more categories. So we see a social class. Peninsulares are the individuals who are the aristocrats, the rulers. They're people who are born in Spain and settle in the Americas. Then you have the Creoles. These are people who are Spanish by descent, but they were born in the Americas. mestizos, who might be Caucasian or European and indigenous. And then we have other groups of people too. We might have Africans and Europeans. We might have Native American Indians and Africans who are enslaved. Some of these terms are offensive and, derogatory terms, but it speaks to some of the ways in which there was a great deal of racial mixing. And these Costas paintings you might find at the time detail the various combinations of mixed race that different groups of people might be. So it's kind of commonplace